Today on the podcast, we begin our monthly updates. I'll focus today mostly on elements tied to California, and then in our next episode, I'll focus more on Disney World in Florida. But before we get going, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about Dick Nunis, who passed away earlier this week. Nunis was the chair of Disney Parks for years and years. He started his career in 1955 and took direction directly from Walt himself. Once he oversaw operations at Disneyland in the early 1960s, Nunis became an extension of Walt's authority in the parks. He understood Walt's ideas and philosophies and looked for ways to implement them at Disneyland. Once Walt passed away, Nunis was one of the key people in both California and Florida who kept Walt's ideas alive in the parks. In the 1980s and 1990s, at times, he clashed with the new management of Michael Eisner and Frank Wells over how to run the parks, as Nunis felt the ideas that he presented were closer to those that Walt would have wanted. Nunis often referred to himself as Walt's apprentice. On our podcast, if you look back to the summer of 2022, we posted an 8-part narrative on the history and life of Dick Nunis. But today on the podcast, I want to include a short interview clip with Tom Nabby. I've probably mentioned that for a while, I've been trying to collect up long-form interviews with those people who started at Disneyland in 1955, trying to save detailed accounts of their lives and experiences for everyone else that comes after us. 2 days after Nunis's passing, I had an appointment again to interview Tom Nabby. I've known Tom for about a dozen years. He started at Disneyland in 1955 and then, like Nunis, transferred to help manage the Florida resort. The clip runs for about 5 minutes. I'm just going to let it play as I think it's a fabulous way to honor the life and work of Dick Nunis with the memories of one of his managers who worked closely with him for years. I do want to preview one element in the interview. Tom will discuss Bermuda shorts, which after seeing them on executives during a Caribbean vacation, Nunis thought would be an excellent alternative to traditional suits for Disney World managers due to the heat. Anyway, here now is the clip.
Are you okay if we talk a little bit about Dick today?
I'm fine.
Okay. Can you tell me a couple stories about Dick?
I think you go back to Dick's history. I think everybody knows he played football for USC. But Dick was a coach. Okay, no matter what he sort of said, he wanted to be that's what he went to school for. That's what he wanted to be, a coach. But Dick was a coach in the way he managed his entire life. Okay, and in turn, if Dick wasn't chewing on you and trying to get you to do what was right, okay, if Dick stopped talking to you, then there's a problem, because he lost interest in you. As long as Dick was chewing on you, he had an interest in you and wanted to help you develop along that line. And that's Dick Nunis. Dick, Bob Allen, and Bob Matheson. Those three people were the keeper of the faith. And in turn had contact through their earlier part of the career with Walt, and carried Walt's philosophies forward, and to ensure that those philosophies got incorporated into whatever they were doing. And there was a real good team of folks that were carried over after when Walt passed.
Mm-hmm. So Dick used to like to keep all of his managers in line and made sure that they didn't spend too much time with the hourly cast members.
There's several things. I don't know if anybody ever talked about the orange tie era.
Tell me about the orange tie era.
Okay, well, Dick wanted to, because things were growing so much and that type of thing. And so Dick wanted to be able to identify who was management, so he knew who to chew on. So operations management wore an orange tie. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dick knew. Okay, you were in management and you were in operations, and you worked for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that we used to call it the orange dye era.
Did Dick ever give you some direction, some correction?
Oh, Dick would give whatever moved him at the time. Okay, it would give you direction to do that, and in turn, sometimes it would be helpful. One of the guys that worked for me for a while that I hired, Bruce Fox, was out in the park area at Epcot, and Dick wanted a bench moved. And I don't know if you've ever tried to move one of them benches, but they are extremely heavy. And so he solicited Bruce. He said, "Come here." And so Dick and Bruce moved the bench backstage because Dick didn't think that the bench was properly maintained and wasn't showing the proper show element. It had chips on it and it had wear to it, and he just didn't think it was appropriate to be in the guest area.
Dick was the person that Walt hired you, but didn't Dick deliver the message to you?
Yeah, well, Dick was there when I got hired, and there was a period in my career that I wanted people to recognize me for what I did, not for what I had done. Okay, and there's that group of people that said, well, the only reason you got where you are is because you knew Nunis. Yeah. Well, if they really knew, by knowing Dick was a hell of a lot harder work, if he didn't know who you were.
How do you think that Dick helped keep Walt's ideas alive?
He pretty much knew what Walt wanted, and in his mind ensured that we were all trained accordingly. And he established the training. He established the Disney look. There's no more Disney look now. But he established the Disney look, and made some very innovative changes in the costumes. He put us in Bermudas.
That's early '90s, isn't it?
But you just couldn't go wear Bermudas like us here. You had to have knee socks on, okay, and they had to match the rest of your and you had to be in a sport coat or a shirt and tie. Okay, so and that was one of the grooming policies for everybody.
Yeah, the story that I heard about that was that he had gone on vacation to the Caribbean and saw down there that there were people wearing shorts and knee socks and suit blazers, and came back and decided this would be a great thing for Disney World as well.
Yeah, well, that didn't last. Leisure suits didn't last very long either.
In the main part of this update, we'll explore new additions to the California Resort, also one new project inspired by the California Resort, and then in our next episode, we'll take a look at the Florida Resort. So let's start with the recently opened Adventureland Treehouse. Not every experience at Disneyland needs to be an e-ticket. For example, the revised Toontown, where the area now resembles an elaborate cartoon-themed city park, proved so popular that not only is it one of the most packed areas of the resort during daytime hours, the play areas were so deeply used that the resort needed to repair and strengthen them only a few months after the area opened. The Adventureland Treehouse is another deeply themed project that fits in this same category. The treehouse had two previous incarnations. Originally, it was the Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse, themed after the 1960 Disney film, which opened at the park in 1962. Then it was transformed into Tarzan's Treehouse in 1999, themed after the animated film Tarzan, which opened that same year. And then in September 2021, after Disney discovered walkway and infrastructure problems with the 60-year-old treehouse, the treehouse closed again for another update, an update that would ultimately take 2 years, though clearly most of the work done on the treehouse was done in the final 12 months, after demolition was finished on the old bridge walkway entrance. The revised attraction now takes up less space, like the original Swiss Family Robinson treehouse. Gone is the entrance staircase and rope bridge that used to take up space in the Adventureland walkway. One of the tremendous improvements here is that the walkway, which had been a pinch point for years, now has a widened space to allow for better guest flow. For longtime Disney fans, I think it's difficult not to see this as the return of the Swiss Family Robinson treehouse, as so many elements from the original Swiss Family Robinson treehouse have been placed back into the tree, including the working water wheel, which had been removed for the Tarzan's version of the treehouse. The water wheel brings up water through a series of bamboo pipes to various rooms in the treehouse, where it provides power for those unique contraptions that have been built there, just as it did back in the 1960s. In fact, this new water wheel is based on molds that were taken from the original water wheel, which miraculously the design team was able to find in storage, though the original wheel by this point was no longer whole. Even though many elements of the new treehouse point back to the original Swiss Family Robinson treehouse, technically its inhabitants are a family who appears to have been inspired by the Robinsons. After all, they keep a copy of the Swiss Family Robinson novel in their treehouse, which was used to begin their own remarkably similar journey to create a house inside of a massive tree. Also, the names of the family living in this treehouse aren't revealed so that anyone can imagine themselves living there in that tree. There's a mom, dad, twin boys, and a girl, as well as a number of animals. The layout of the treehouse is fairly straightforward. The interests of each family member are represented in one area. At the base of the tree is the father's kitchen, where pots powered by water flow stir themselves and the food is kept in a water-cooled box. The mother is a musician. In her room, or loft, are instruments including a pump organ that plays the Swiska polka, which was not only a notable musical theme from that 1960s Disney film, it was also the soundtrack that was played here in Adventureland for decades at the original treehouse. That is, until Tarzan took over. So again, even though this is not technically the Swiss Family Robinsons in the treehouse, many elements from that original experience, such as the music, are layered into this revised attraction. Officially, at least in those Disney PR announcements, this attraction is not based on a movie, but many design elements in the new treehouse point back to the 1960s Swiss Family film. As the inhabitants are never seen, named, or even described except for their interests and hobbies, it's easy to imagine them in any way you choose. Essentially, Disney has removed all specific identity markers from the family. Even geographic elements have been removed here. The family officially lives at the edge of a town called Adventureland. This, again, allows guests to fill in those details as they like. In place of a named human family, the visible inhabitants of the treehouse are animals, which bring personality, movement, and a sense of play to the attraction. Anyways, let's move on with our tour. Also in the music room are two novels, Swiss Family Robinson, which we've already mentioned, and Tarzan. These, of course, were the basis vis-a-vis film adaptations for the two previous incarnations of the treehouse. But also, these two books were the touchstones for Adventureland during waltz time. The connection with the Swiss Family Robinson here is, of course, obvious. But while Disneyland was being designed, the Tarzan films were such a strong influence on the Jungle Cruise that the river portions of that attraction were often referred to as either the Hollywood Jungle or Tarzan's Jungle. Next up is the daughter's room, which is filled with telescopes and other tools used for astronomy. In her room is also a letter from a member of the SEA, also an SEA flag or banner. That's the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, which is a fictional organization of world travelers typically tied to the 19th or early part of the 20th century. There are nods to other fictional members of the SEA or icons of that organization in the Jungle Cruise, over at Big Thunder, and of course in a couple of nearby shops. The references to the SEA here are very light and mostly arranged to suggest that the unnamed daughter someday would like to join their ranks. As in other places of the resort, references to the SEA are typically hidden Easter eggs, arranged for repeat visitors who want to find new meaning in familiar details, such as that characters in one fictional organization may actually tie together many Disney experiences in Adventureland and Frontierland with a very subtle secondary narrative. Last on the list are the twin boys, one of whom is interested in plants, the other in animals. And this is another place where the playful kinetics of mechanical animals provide humor and interesting movement. In this room, a monkey hangs from a trapeze while playing with a timer that presumably only releases his food at a certain time of the day. In a nearby terrarium, a mechanical frog leaps across a tiny pond, and on a perch, a toucan, more or less the mechanical twin to those birds over in the tiki room, sits on a perch and thoughtfully observes it all. With all of these elements, the treehouse is again a place of discovery. For adults, there are clear callbacks to the original Swiss Family treehouse that existed here until 1999. But for kids, I think, it will mainly be a place of discovery, the exploration of a giant tree where a family has chosen to live. Also, this tree is a place fully occupied with pets. Though the humans don't have names, the animals do. The monkey is named Rascal, and the ostrich down on the ground floor is named Jane. This ostrich is one of the most notable new amusements in the treehouse, Jane bobbing her ostrich head up over a short fence, looking down at guests, and then lowering her head behind the fence, where it stays hidden for a few seconds. Next on the list for the California resort is a new restaurant out at Pixar Place Hotel. And let me back into this a little bit, especially as all of the Pixar elements at the Pixar Place Hotel are still coming online. For fans of the resort, the Pixar Place Hotel was recently known as the Paradise Pier Hotel. For 2 decades, the Disneyland hotel system had 3 tiers, 3 mostly discrete properties. At the top was the Grand Californian, next the classic Disneyland Hotel with its elegant slender towers, and third the Paradise Pier Hotel, a 15-story tower with an outdoor pool and viewing areas for the fireworks. But to make this so-called new restaurant review even more confusing, Paradise Pier didn't even start out life as Paradise Pier, nor did it even start out as a Disney hotel, even though it was just across the way from the Disneyland Towers. It started as the Emerald Hotel, owned by Japanese investors, largely configured to attract overseas tourists. But the Emerald, at least in terms of its identity, didn't exactly strike a chord with theme park fans. 5 years after it first opened, the owners changed its name to the Pan Pacific Hotel, which held notes of both old Hollywood and also the beach, even though the hotel was about a half-hour drive to the closest beach. In the mid-1990s, Disney was exploring expanding the Disneyland Resort with a new park. Initially, they planned to build Westcott, a park that would have internationally themed hotels integrated into various areas of the park. But once the plan to build Westcott was dropped, ultimately in favor of a more traditional and far less costly theme park, Disney became interested in expanding its hotel portfolio elsewhere. And at this point in 1995, Disney bought the old Emerald Hotel, aka the Pan Pacific Hotel, and once more in 2000, Disney changed the name of this hotel to pair with the name of the Paradise Pier area inside of Disney's new theme park, Disney's California Adventure, which would open the following year in 2001. The upper floors of this hotel did have nice views down into DCA. But aside from that, the hotel had very little Disney theming and still felt like a mid-level chain hotel, like a Sheraton or a Ramada, than it did a Disney hotel, particularly those that are found at Disney World. And then about a year ago, the old Emerald Hotel went through another transformation as Disney announced that it would redesign the hotel, this time as the Pixar Place Hotel, with the finished hotel opening in 2024. At this time, the hotel is still finishing its redesign, but the walls in the lobby are already adorned with concept sketches of Pixar characters, from Edna Mode from The Incredibles, to Joe Gardner from Soul, to Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story. The store, too, is open, which focuses on Pixar-related products, and the restaurant is also open. The restaurant is called Great Maple, a modern American eatery. It's a local chain with other restaurants in Pasadena and Newport Beach. This is one of the trends for downtown Disney right now, to bring in successful local restaurants, such as Porto's, a Cuban bakery. So the trend is specifically to move away from established national chains such as the Rainforest Cafe and to focus more on small, local restaurants. The trend is also to limit Disney-owned and Disney-operated restaurants, particularly in California. And let me contextualize this a little bit with a historically long view of how the Disney company tends to work. Earlier this week, entirely unrelated to this review, I was reading through annual profit and loss reports for Disney World during its initial years, in the early 1970s. Overall, the resort was very profitable, but not every division produced a profit. One of the biggest problem areas was golf, but golf, especially the annual tournament, created a lot of free publicity for the resort. The other area was food, both table and quick service restaurants. Both of these areas represented a departure from Disney's core identity, moving them further into outdoor recreations and into food service. At this time, Disney was almost wholly an entertainment company. It did very well with that. But like all companies, it sometimes had trouble shifting into other business areas. For Disney, at least historically, restaurants were often a struggle. Restaurants were also a huge struggle in the mid-1960s at the Disney-owned Celebrity Sports Center in Denver, and it was the same at Walt Disney World when it opened in the 1970s. And so even this year, 2023, a successful local restaurant integrated into the Disneyland hotel system, I think is a pretty good move. The restaurant doesn't have a defining visual motif, such as with Blue Bayou, Carnation Corner, or even Jazz Kitchen, nor does it present a strong resort feel, such as with the poolside eatery over at the Grand Californian, the Craftsman Grill. There are a few interesting, stylized black and white photos of Pixar characters on the wall, as if fashion photographer Bruce Weber had taken brooding portraits of Woody and Bo Peep. But these elements are subdued. The restaurant feels far more like a middle-upper-class restaurant from Orange County or Los Angeles inserted into the resort, which has its own pros and cons. But this style of restaurant is the direction that downtown Disney seems to be headed in. In terms of our pricing scale, Great Maple is definitely a moderate, with some salads and sandwiches towards the lower end of our moderate range. Great Maple has a unique menu, in that it's the only restaurant on property to serve their full breakfast offerings all day long. So if you want French toast or a bacon scramble at 10 o'clock at night, this is the one and only place on property to go. Between all of the offerings, the restaurant has just about 30 entrees, so of course I haven't tried them all. I've mostly gone at this point with server recommendations. Of those dishes I've tried, the salmon was the standout. A generous piece of salmon crusted with pecan and panko, touched with maple, and then served high atop a bed of chopped cauliflower and broccoli. Another standout are the maple and bacon donuts, which I'm pretty sure are the most expensive donuts that I've ever seen. 3 for $18, making them $6 a piece. But they are delicious. One of my biggest takeaways from recent visits to Great Maple and the Pixar Place Hotel is that I can start to see the new design layout for this end of the Disneyland resort. Like the redesigned Jazz Kitchen and the newly opened DVC villas at the Disneyland Hotel, the Pixar Place Hotel, along with other areas at this end of downtown Disney, are expressing a mid-century feel both in terms of color and the use of simple geometric shapes in terms of design. And since these things are being put together on Disney property, there's definitely the feel of the ghost of designer Mary Blair hovering over all of this. The mid-century feel, in part, even moves into the Pixar Place Hotel, similar to the feel of the recently opened DVC villas at the Disneyland Hotel. But there's a difference. The villas are lovely from top to bottom, a space that was designed to present a mid-century vibe. But the Pixar Place Hotel does feel a little as though some of the villa's mid-century vibe was layered into a much older hotel from the 1980s that wasn't designed for this type of presentation, which of course is the case. But this overall mix of mid-century modern with white and pastel tones, along with a reliance on geometric shapes, is going to be the feel of this half of the Disneyland resort very soon, along with a new wave of non-Disney-owned restaurants. Overall, I think this is a strong revision now that I can see how the pieces are coming together. Though it does nudge the resort meals towards slightly higher price points, as we've talked about in previous reviews. Regardless, Great Maple is a very good addition to the resort. The food is significantly better than Goofy's Kitchen or Storytellers. My favorite modestly priced restaurant in the Disneyland Hotel complex remains Craftsman Grill, but I would place Great Maple as second. At third, largely for its elaborate theming, I'd place Trader Sam's. So, if you want to step out of the themed resort feel for an hour or so to take a break entirely from Disneyland and have a good, modestly priced meal, Great Maple may be your ticket. But again, the overall feel, food, and value of Craftsman Grill over at the Grand Californian still has, at least for me, a slight advantage. Next up in our omnibus presentation this week is a discussion with ex-Imagineer Eddie Sotto. Eddie worked for WDI for 13 years, largely as Senior Vice President of Concept Design. He had a hand in the Indiana Jones adventure, the development of Tokyo Disneyland, and the area of Main Street at Disneyland Paris. Back in 1996, Eddie worked with the integration of onboard audio for Space Mountain, adding the first onboard audio soundtrack to this ride. It featured surf rock legend Dick Dale and soon became a fan favorite on the ride. The Dick Dale soundtrack is no longer there, but over the past couple of years, Sotto has put together a band to create a new song, a type of homage in the style of that original Dick Dale tune that in many ways now is the ideal soundtrack for this ride. The song, I should point out, is also available now on iTunes.
So with me today is Eddie Sotto, ex-Imagineer, who has recently put together audio for Space Mountain that's an homage to the surf tones of the original onboard audio for that roller coaster. Welcome.
Wow, thank you, Todd. You know, it's so great to be here. I've always enjoyed your podcast so much. And here I work with Herbie Ryman for probably the last 3 years of his life, but I never really even drinking with this guy. I had no idea until you did your series, really the dimensions of that man. So thank you to that. I'm sure all of our listeners enjoy that. I'm excited to be here because it's 25 years since this original onboard audio was put on the attraction with Dick Dale. at least he was the sort of the headliner in that musical track. And that's very exciting. But it's also the 60th anniversary, 2023, of surf music at all. The Ventures, all those great surf sounds started pretty much here in California in 1963. So I don't know. I just thought it would be something exciting to kind of come back and revisit. COVID, I think all of us, were contemplating our navels there for a while, and I was certainly as an artist frustrated and wanted to do something. Couldn't really do much of anything, and ended up becoming best friends with Laramie Dean, who, if you learn about this guy, he's unique. He made a sojourn to Dick Dale. He lived on his ranch. He toured with him, became literally the only protege headliner with Dick Dale. He got so good at playing the guitar. And when Dick passed, pretty much, if you want that sound, he's the torch holder for this Dick Dale sound, which is incredibly unique. And so Laramie Dean is really the person who is at the center of this record. So I thought to myself, well, gee, since I know the guy who plays just like Dick Dale, why don't we just have some fun? I was, because we had to slave to a ride, never 100% happy with the music. I liked the music. It was perfect for the ride, but I always wondered what it would be like as just a record. Forget about timing it, just make a fun record. So Laramie and I just started goofing around. And it took 2 years to do this in and out of a studio that, you kind of get it when you have time, labor of love kind of a thing. No, this was never planned as a product. It was just planned as something fun that we were going to be doing, but it got to be kind of good, and then turned into something. We said, well, you know what? We'd like to share this. This is good enough to share. I just don't want to ride in my car and chase other cars with it. I want to do something unique.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of onboard audio and how we went from coasters in which the noise was mostly ambient or maybe some atmospheric noise through speakers and things that were more timed to the actual movement of the vehicles. So how did that all come about? That came about in the 90s, right?
Well, it's kind of funny. In anticipation of this interview, I did a little bit of thinking about it, and there's a technology called limit switches that ride vehicles used to, back in the olden days, run into. The little switch would trip and it would trigger an animatronic scene or an effect, like in Funhouse, things like that. And at times it would also trigger audio effects. I mean, so there was always this kind of primitive way of getting something to play. Of course, we remember in carnivals and things, they would sometimes turn on a particular song when they had the round ride spinning or something like that. You'd hear rock and roll music. And so everyone's always kind of attempted that. But I remember growing up with Tom Morris, who's a far more well-known Imagineer than I'll ever be. And Tom Morris and I were friends, and Tom would make cassettes with music on the ride. I would do similar things, but he was kind of the first guy that I knew that was creating these fun remixes using Disney sound bites, something I can't certainly do today, right? But Disney sound bites. And we just as friends pass these things around. And I remember taking Foreigner's Star Rider in 1977 on Space Mountain myself and listening to songs I thought were appropriate. And all those things kind of happened. But he was always trying to do rock and roll or music on the ride. And later on, when you look at Space Mountain, these coasters, FedEx came along and was going to sponsor it. And there was about $1 million there to do something with the show. And I had remembered what Tom had come up with. And I guess, kind of simultaneously, the R&D folks had developed a way to put audio speakers on the vehicles, just mount them, like basically a ghetto blaster or right there on behind your head. They were partially engineered, I would say, they were primitive. And so we used that money to pioneer onboard audio on the ride. So I went and pitched to Federal Express how great it would be to put music on the ride, and this would be something that would really be different. But no one told me that Space Mountain is a gravity ride that varies up to 30 seconds in trip time based on the heat of the wheels and primarily and the total weight of the guests. A light train may barely make it through. A heavy train may be done, before you can say churros. So all these things, kind of play into how do you synchronize it. So at the same time, I was driving around the Disney parking lot in a Volkswagen Golf convertible, and I would just play the Batman theme for the TV show where Batman says, batteries to power, to the Batmobile. And of course the theme would come on and I would burn out of the web parking lot and go tearing down the streets to the music and doing all this with my friends, and we'd be laughing and playing Batman, driving around, going to lunch. And about that same time. And all of this I know this sounds very esoteric, but it all kind of comes together, kind of going, well, this is onboard audio for my car that's sync, why can't we do that on the ride in a real way? And I'd always love the song Whole Lot of Love from Led Zeppelin, where you hear that whole lot of love. It's a guitar slide. And I'd always imagined, kind of going back to the days of me and Tom, of having a guitar lead going into a curve and how satisfying it would be if the lead just went, I went with you, And I think a friend of mine, I think it was Doug Miller, someone had brought a Dick Dale CD in, or I'd just seen Pulp Fiction with Mr. Lou as the lead song. And I was thinking about Dick Dale, and I got his album, and he has all these leads in it. I thought, well, there's the perfect guy. So when you go to Tony Baxter and you say, hey, I want to put surf music on Space Mountain. We'd already talked to Michael Eisner and he and Tony. They were all into classical music. Let's have John Williams, a big rousing score. Michael Eisner says, well, I only want it to be recognizable. The music has to be recognizable. If you can't recognize it from somewhere, then we shouldn't do it. So I said, okay, I guess my surf music is out, Then I thought, wait a minute, hold it. Why don't we take a piece of public domain music, The Carnival of the Animals from Camille Saint-Saëns, which is pretty much in Beauty and the Beast. La, 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 very lilting, very spacey. I used to love it. Oh,
so
yeah.
I have a question here. I have a question about this part here. So for me, the reference point is not Beauty and the Beast. For me, the reference point here is Impressions de France.
Well, that's, it's funny. I mentioned that to the audience, but that is where I first heard it. And the twinkling and the sparkling, that's my favorite part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I thought that music sounds like space to me. And if I had to have a classical piece to please Michael Eisner, that would be what I would choose. And then the second one was, well, why can't Dick Dale play that on a surf guitar and we turn this into something? So, Tony Baxter's a good guy. And, at this point in time, I think I had worn him down or something. And I think he wanted music to Star Wars. There's no music to you couldn't license it. We had 30 grand to just produce the music. That's nothing in today's world. At any rate, I called Dick Dale on the phone, cold call Dick Dale. And you're not supposed to do this, but I just sort of made something up. I guess that's my job. So I said, well, hey, Dick, how would you like to be standing on top of the Matterhorn Mountain on opening night? I'd seen this Billy Idol video where he was on top of a building. So I called Dick Dale on the phone and pitched this idea that he could be on top of the Matterhorn with searchlights and helicopters circling him, playing on opening night, doing a concert from the top of the Matterhorn. Of course, what musician wouldn't say yes to that? And he did, which helped me with the budget a lot. That was really great. So that was a great, great thing that he was all in. He goes, I grew up going to Disneyland back in the 50s. I went right when they opened, and he has a big fondness for Disneyland. How do you know, right? So he goes, I just want to have a pass to come in anytime. I go, I think we can figure that out. Unfortunately, when it came time after he did everything to opening the thing, he said, well, Eddie, what about this Matterhorn thing? Well, I had never called entertainment to inform them that I had promised him that he would be on top of the Matterhorn. So I called entertainment and they said, absolutely not. We're not insured to put talent on top of the Matterhorn. We can't do that. Why did you say that? You have no right to say. They were correct. So I thought, what am I going to do? Now I am in. What if this guy says, I don't want my music on the ride? Anyway, I kind of catastrophized the whole thing in my mind. And then so I finally called Dick back and said, you know something? The Matterhorn's not good enough for you. I don't know why I didn't think of this before. Can you play on top of Space Mountain? Because entertainment said, well, we could put a scaffold on Space Mountain. He could be on the top of Space Mountain. We have a ladder for that. We could do that. So I said, that's your ride. That's where your music is. Your music's not on the Matterhorn. Your music's on Space Mountain. Okay, yeah, you're right. Let's do that. So on opening night, he did play beautifully up on top of Space Mountain. And on his website, he says it's the scariest thing he ever did, going up on that ladder to be up on top of Space Mountain. But the highlight of his career was playing on top of that mountain. So this whole idea still of syncing, going back to the R&D folks, let's go back to that limit switch. what we did and what they did, it was their idea, is we put switches along the track that would only trigger Dick's guitar lead in the sound system. So it was a separate, it would trigger a separate piece of music. And then at the end of the ride, where you wouldn't really know how long it would end, that is a piece of music that, yes, it would, the one part would be tailored to the ending of the ride. So it always blows up and evaporates at the same moment. But any leads would have been triggered there too. So there's extra backing music. So we basically had a longer track of a backing band playing la 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 la, and then triggered our guitar player along the way. And it
That's
actually worked
fascinating.
out. And this is what I think when people say I remember it and I really liked it, I think that's why they liked it. Because I don't know that they do that today in the same way. They're not trying to be as granular with triggering things by moments. And certainly in this tribute record, we can't do that, but we can kind of recall some of the fun of that. And we got Jimmy Dale, Dick's son, to come in and play some of those. I think they're called pterodactyls. At least Dick called them these crazy leads, and we changed them. We put in something different for those songs.
So we haven't talked at all about the new tune that you put together. How did this tell us what this is and how it came together?
Okay, so during COVID, I was completely like so many of us, just staring at the wall. And for an artist or anyone like that, you just have to make something. You've got to do something. I was kind of going nuts, and because everything had stopped. I'm sure we all remember that. And just by coincidence, I'd made friends with Laramie Dean, this person who was the protege of Dick Dale, toured with him, headlined with him, learned all of his secrets. And by the way, Dick Dale's guitar and how he plays in the 60s is so fascinating, Todd, because he actually put aircraft cables in place of strings on his guitar to give it a chainsaw effect. If you heard this man live, it would cut through you. You felt it in your chest, not in your ears. This is entirely true. And you would see sometimes he had huge calluses on his hands, but his fingers could bleed from just playing that hard on his guitar. And back in the 1963, no one was on Ed Sullivan was playing like that, but him. He kind of invented in a weird way heavy metal. And that's one of the reasons Dick is on there, because the sound of his guitar cuts through the noise, ambient noise of an attraction. The speakers are not on your head, they're playing in a room. How does that sound get past, all the room to your ears? So Dick's guitar was perfect for that. So here I am looking at Laramie Dean going, and he's telling me about songs he wants to do. I think I did a cover for him. They saved Gidget's Brain. I illustrated a surf cover for him. And I thought, man, I'm doing the cover. Why don't we let's just do a different Space Mountain. Let's do, what would you do if you could take this melody and do it over again? And we'll make fun of it. I'll start doing wacky com chat, guitars go, this is flight safety, churros go, we would just have fun. And he goes, I'd love that. I need some fun too. Let's get a band together. I said, well, you know what? If we're going to do this and have fun, let's get the bass player from Halix, the defunct summer Wookiee band, where this
Who
Roger
played on the
Freeland,
Space Mountain stage?
who played on the Space Mountain
Mhm.
stage. Let's put Roger Freeland, the Wookiee from this. And you know what? In our story, he's going to be the monster that destroys Space Mountain and escape from Space Mountain. We'll just make up our own little story. We'll have our own, I mean, you've heard songs. I remember Blondie's Attack of the Giant Ants, where they have a whole sci-fi thing going on in this early Blondie album. So I said, Laramie, let's make it like Blondie, where that drum solo comes in and you got these monsters coming in and stuff. And he goes, I love that. I love monsters. I said, yeah, that's going to be so cool. But well, where do we get? Well, we just need those drums from Blondie. I go, well, let's. Laramie says, I know Clem Burke, the drummer. Let's call him. I call Clem Burke. Clem Burke goes, I'm in. So we get the drummer from Blondie, the bass player from Halix. Then our engineer played in Agent Orange, which is a very famous Orange County punk band, and so did Laramie. He toured with Agent Orange, if you know the song Bloodstains. Anyway, which I loved. I have that on my Rodney Bingenheimer CD. So I'm a big Ramones. Laramie and I are massive Ramones fans. We tried to get Marky Ramone to play drums on this, but he went to Europe. So, but he was interested. So we've talked to a lot of interesting people on this thing, but it was just a labor of love. No budget. People are like 60th anniversary of surf. I'm in. I love it. And the Blondie and the Ramones both loved surf music, both bands. So Clem, when he heard surf music, he's like, yeah, I want to come do that. So he came in the studio and what a professional. He made this record what I thought made it super good. So that's kind of how it got started. And when we had time, we worked on it. And but it kind of got to be something once you get these people that are like Clem Burke in there, I'm kind of like, well, maybe we should do something with this. This seems like really, really fun. So I did a little cover. We needed extra songs to go with it. And talking to you, actually, you suggested, hey, well, why don't you have a version you can take on the ride that's more closely timed, even which is something we never scored it for that. But on your suggestion, we did it. So thanks to you, Todd, we've got two versions you can buy. Is now
Two
twice as
versions.
expensive. Yeah. So I mean, $1.29. Come on, a stick of gum is $1.29. You can have this thing. It's coming out on iTunes. The early part of December it'll be out. It's already in the queue for iTunes right now. So I'm not just making this up. So we're kind of committed, folks. And then we're also doing some other. We got so fun with parodies. We did a Tiki Room parody, and we also did a parody to Big Thunder because we just for fun. I mean, and there's no direct references, but anything like that. I don't want to get in trouble with Disney. We're just having fun here. We'll probably make. When you have to split 90 cents four ways, I don't think you're going to get very far. So I don't think this is going to.
It's a very small piece of a stick of gum.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, yeah, it's a very small piece of a stick of gum. So we're just doing this to do it. I like doing things I haven't done. I've done airplanes, and people say you can't do an airplane. All kinds of things that I was always told. Well, no, you're a theme park designer. So I go, well, no, I'm not. I'm a guy. I just want to do fun things. I like to drive fast cars and stuff. I just enjoy all that.
That sounds awesome. Okay, so in the not too distant future, people are going to be on Space Mountain. They're going to have their earbuds in really, really firmly, but they can listen to this new version of homage to surf music that used to occupy the big dome there in Tomorrowland.
Yeah, and one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think Laramie bought me as a gift these JBL wireless headphones. A lot of people have wireless headphones for home use. I guess, could you take those into the park and listen on headphones if you want? Will they allow you to do that?
That's an excellent. Well, they will let you
Has
take the
anyone
headphones into the
tried
park.
that? I think I've seen people with headphones in the park. I'm hard of hearing. I could certainly claim that,
Would they let you ride the roller coaster with over-the-ear headphones? That's another question.
Yes, but you don't put them on until after you leave the dispatch. You have them in your lap.
Exactly. If I were thinking about this, so from the beginning of COVID, when we were moving towards AirPods, I used to have when I go running these wired earbuds, they were wireless, but they had a little under the chin wire. If you had those, I think those would probably be the safest thing to go on a roller coaster with.
I don't know. I would if you could sneak headphones in and hear it on headphones and just carefully hold them so you wouldn't lose them on the ride. I think that would be the best effect, right?
I think there's going to be many people that figure out how to listen to stuff, just like Tom Morris
Well, they're doing
did
it
back
now.
in the 90s. Yes.
I mean, aren't there also people? I mean, I believe there's people right now that have already made their own mixes that are swapping mixes on these rides already.
Oh,
So,
I think that was a thing a little while ago. Yeah.
oh, one thing I failed to mention, I think you'll find interesting. We did exit surveys, and guests coming out of the ride after music was added, like over 90. Well, first of all, 95% of the guests said it was like, great. They love it. Super high ratings for it. The second one was they believed the ride went faster. I had them add the question, did you believe the ride, had been speeded up? And they said, yes, it had. So if you did the right tempo music, you can psychologically change the speed of the ride in the mind of the guest. Anyway, hopefully that's a good piece of news. Watch for it on iTunes. We're going to also put it out on vinyl as a collector's thing with picture discs and nice piece of cover art there, signed or whatever. We'll do some fun with it. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us. I look forward to seeing it out there in the world.
The song, which is called Escape from Space Mountain, is absolutely fabulous. If you're a fan of the parks, you'll immediately recognize the dance between something familiar and something new right away. It's available on iTunes as a single for $1.29. It's also available as a digital download on Amazon and elsewhere. It's listed under the artist Laramie Dean. I'd like to thank our guests today, Eddie Sotto and Tom Nabby. I'll be back in a week with a new episode. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things. deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us on Bandcamp as monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.